To skirt the often invisible border separating imagination and transcendence, the hero and his journey, then charting the role each human plays as architect of those distinctions in their own unfolding legend. This is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. If I had to identify one person now alive who best personified the spirit and passion of Charles Fort, that early renegade chronicler of all things fleeting and weird, it might well be our guest today. Joshua Cutchin is more than a mere reporter of such anomalies. His interest is wide, his analysis daring, and he's done much in recent years to develop these discussions and lend them intellectual legitimacy. His 8+ books are exhaustively researched, wonderfully written, and brimming with insight. He's been on this show before to discuss his two-volume work, Ecology of Souls, and today he's joining us to explore his latest book, Fourth Wall Phantoms: Reflections on the Paranormal, Narrative, and Fiction's Becoming Fact. I also want to explore his battle with alcoholism and addiction as disclosed in this new book, and explore how that journey into self has helped define and charge his explorations into the unknown. As most of you know, I have also struggled with addiction to opioids and believe that struggle has been central to establishing the framework and architecture that upholds these conversations and my life. You do, after all, have to die to be reborn. Welcome back to the show, Joshua.
Thank you for that very charitable and too generous introduction. But I'll just say thank you and proceed as opposed to going back and forth about, oh, I'm not worthy. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be a part of high resolution conversations in this field.
Yeah,
So I'm really looking forward to our time together today.
me too. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Your new book, things that have been going on. I've interviewed Kevin Cann and Jeff Kripal in recent months, and they both pointed to a class that's coming up that's going to use your book as a part of a leaping off point. So I'd like to talk about that. But let's just start from okay, so let's start with the book, and then we'll go into some other things about the book that are included in the book, but not necessarily only in the book. Fourth Wall Phantoms, what would you say was your mission when you set out to write that book, and how do you feel like you've done now that it's out?
It's a hard book to talk about because there's so much of it is so much more theoretical than what I normally go into. I push myself into some places that I don't normally go, like some areas of philosophy and stuff. And broad and shallow is probably what I ended up doing, but I still went there and pushed myself to go there. Um, my original idea for this, as my books tend to do, they tend to come, they're sort of triangulated from various different spaces and sources. So, post Ecology of Souls, which definitely ties into my alcoholism story, which we can get to later. But post Ecology of Souls, uh, what I was doing felt very different. It felt like a bit of a different conversation was being had. And while I still have a soft spot for really narrow, focused topics, it was like, oh, well, we're dealing with these big, broad ideas about what the phenomenon is.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do, so I zigged instead of zagging and wrote a novel.
Mhm.
And part of that was to experience what I had had several friends of mine mention, which is the fact that once you create a really well-rounded character, there are certain things that the character will and won't let you do. I heard this from some like really straight ahead atheist type author friends of mine. And I'm like, do you hear what you're saying there and what that implies? So I wanted to experience a little bit of that. So my novel, Them Old Ways Never Died, was kind of like a little bit of dipping my toe into that. Um, but then there were some other ideas that I'd played with in various forms. One of them that sort of forms a lot of the backbone of this book was an essay in Jack Hunter's Deep Weird that looks at the breaking of the fourth wall. But so those are two different things that sort of were pushing me in this direction. I think that living in a post-truth era where we don't believe anything from any establishment figures probably speaks to why this book came out now. But the other thing is, one of the things that I like to do is I like to look at my view of the phenomenon, whatever it may be, and push where there's mush, so to speak, and to really sort of
Yeah.
interrogate any shortcomings. I try to do that in my political life, in my religious life, in my, and in my author life too. So, there's something that I found so parsimonious about the ideas that I put there in Ecology of Souls about, the dead and soul and spirit and the afterlife. And then you've got these stories, which are, um, as I say in the book, they're not in the waste bin. They're in the landfill.
Yeah,
The stories about fictional characters that people see while out and about. What the heck do you do with those? Can they fit into this sort of model that I put out in Ecology of Souls? And if not, like, how can that be amended? What does this say about our relationship to reality? And honestly,
exactly.
if these stories about fictional characters appearing in real life are to be believed, who knows? But if they are to be believed, what does that say about ufology, parapsychology, and cryptozoology? So that was the goal of the book.
Yeah. And how do you feel like it came out? I mean, obviously, I think there's been some pretty good critical reception, but from
Yeah,
your,
yeah. I'm sorry. Apparently, my voice just changed. Um, yeah, it's. I mean, it's been. I'm always sort of humbled by the things that I hear from people whenever I put out a new book. It seems like it's hard to talk about this because I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. That's not what I mean because I'm still in awe of this myself.
yeah,
Um, I get correspondence from people that like I cited in the book, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, love your work, so and so and so and so." And I'm like, "Wait, no, you're not supposed to love it. I'm supposed to come to you on bended knee and introduce myself. You're not supposed to know who I am already." So it's always been a surreal experience, from the early days of. I'm just a kid who was reading Jerome Clark's The Unexplained in middle school, and I release a Trojan Feast and Jerry Clark comes out with a review of it. It's like, well, this is not the reality that I'm supposed to be in, but here I am anyway. So reception has been very good. I am very happy with it. It's a very personal book. I would say that, you know, my my head is Ecology of Souls. My soul is my novel, Them Old Ways Never Die, but Fourth Wall Phantoms is my heart. And what I mean by that is that this type of story, this type of reality bending, what can the phenomenon teach us about the way we live our lives? Like that's my heart, and high strangeness is my heart, and things don't get more
yeah.
high strange than these ideas of fictional incursions that I talk about of fictional characters coming to life. So yeah, this is the sort of head, soul, heart trilogy, I guess you could call it that.
I love that idea. It's interesting to me because I think that what you're pointing to here is really revelatory about what we're all sort of encountering. It's like when people go out and they see a Sasquatch, they're like, "Oh, I've seen this animal in the woods," and maybe it's actually an animal that's sort of been a renegade in the mountains for 10,000 years, and it's been a tribe and actually physically arrives here through natural means. They see a UFO and they're like, "Oh, it's an actual physical craft and it's come here." But how much of this is a one giant sort of consciousness feedback loop where we're kind of informing our own visions with the things that we bring to it? And I think that that's almost best reflected by this phenomenon of people seeing fictional characters manifest because you're directly pulling from legend, and that is, or not necessarily you, but something is pulling from legend and manifesting this thing in reality. It seems like, what does that say about humanity's relationship to reality and what these things actually are? And that seems like the question, right?
Yeah, it touches on perception, expectation, society, and culture. You know, the book starts off with these ideas of fictional incursions, of fictional characters that step off the screen, but that's really just a launch pad for talking about the UFO question and the ghost question and the and the cryptozoology question. These ideas have been around for a while. That especially in regards to the UFO phenomenon, that sightings are indeed in some sort of feedback loop, some sort of dialogue with culture. Scholars who have really done a great job of looking at this are Bertrand Mayust, who sort of showed that a lot of 60s and 70s UFO experiences look a lot like science fiction pulps.
From
Martin
the 50s,
Kottmeyer,
right?
yeah, from the
Yeah.
50s, yeah. Martin Kottmeyer is another person who's done some great work. One thing that I always like to point out is that the first instance of of automobile interference from a UFO, that old trope, you see the UFO and your engine dies and your headlights die.
Yeah. And you're
That the
like,
first instances of those are from, again, these sort of sci-fi short stories. And I have a great deal of respect for Martin Kottmeyer, one of my favorite UFO scholars. But I kind of see a problem in this thinking too, in this sort of what I think is that you take a look at that question. Do UFOs shut off car engines? Oh, well, it first appeared in fiction, so it must be BS, right?
Exactly. That's like the typical
But
excuse. Yeah.
but is that not an evolution of a ghost blowing out a candle? And I think it kind of is it speaks to the same things. Like, this other reality is influencing our technology. And so I think what happens if you look back far enough is that you wind up in this leapfrogging of, oh, well, it first appeared in fiction. No, it first appeared in a real account. Oh, it first appeared in art. No, it first appeared and you keep on doing this leapfrog, this sort of game of one-upsmanship. And I think you wind up at like petroglyphs. And at that point you're so deep in the timeline that it's like, is this a depiction of lived experience, or is it art, or is it both just so blended together that there's no separating the two? And I think that's really a lot of what's happening.
Now, I mentioned that the to have Jeffrey Kripal teaching your book is a pretty heady compliment, I think. And Kevin Cann too, who I enormously enjoy and I think has way more insight than he's received credit for up to this point. So I like having him on the show because I just kind of bask in his knowledge. The guy is fundamentally profound, and one of my favorite people. But anyway,
Yeah.
uh, what do you are you aware of how they're going to approach this, and what do you think? Because I thought you were going to be on the class as originally as an instructor, but that seems to not be the case anymore. Can
Yeah,
you help clarify that for us and what they're how they may approach your text?
yeah. So my unfolding relationship with Jeff and Kevin has been one of the most surprising and rewarding side effects of my work in this. And Jeff was one of those people who I approached for a blurb about Ecology of Souls back in the day. I'm like, hi, probably don't know who I am, but this is what I'm doing. I think, you might be. He was like, no, Josh, it's, let's would love to do this. So I keep up with Jeff pretty regularly. And I keep up with Kevin very regularly. We have weekly meetings to sort of get me completely up to speed on Platonic surrealism.
Yeah, that's my
As
journey too right now, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, not the weekly meetings, but the research.
yeah, it's a lot to take in, and I've talked to Kevin, and Kevin's like, you're probably the second. He says after me, you're probably the second person on the planet who has a really good grasp of this. I'm like, sometimes I'm not sure I do, but I've read and spent a lot of time with Kevin's writings, and again with him on a weekly basis. What I interpret happening at Esalen, well, let's back this up, right? So I'm going again. Pinch me, I'm going to Esalen. Like I don't know how to.
I know, right?
It's one of those things where it was a bucket list item for me, and I would love to have just taken a tour or just like
Sure.
driven by it or something. And the idea of being in there in any sort of official capacity is something that I could have never hoped for. Um, as far as yeah, Kevin was talking about me co-teaching with them, and I think that there are a bunch of different reasons why it seems more appropriate on this first outing, my first time there, to be a workshop assistant, which is what I will be, and I'm very grateful for that. Um, One of the recommended texts for the book for the course, which I probably should say what the dates were, I guess. But one of
I'll put it in
Okay,
the
put it in the show notes.
description. Yeah,
It's in
yeah.
December. Yeah, first weekend in December. Um, One of the recommended texts is Fourth Wall Phantoms, which is kind of surprising because obviously, you know, Kevin and Jeff's trajectory. I didn't write Fourth Wall Phantoms based on any intention that it would intersect with what they were doing in this class, which had been sort of in the works for a while. So it's really a sort of serendipitous in that regard. But I think how it sort of interfaces with Platonic surrealism is that a lot of the um, a lot of the lessons that I think can be learned from narratology are artistic ways of reframing some of the concepts that Kevin talks about in Platonic surrealism. Um, the idea of agency is really important. One's own agency is really important to both Fourth Wall Phantoms and Kevin's philosophy of Platonic surrealism, as well as the idea that certain things are prescripted, if that makes any sense. Certain things are sort of more likely to happen or less likely to happen, and things like that. Um, and so the idea of having roles to play and grafting a narrative onto one's experience in life also speaks to both the book and Platonic surrealism. And Kevin has written some stuff that sort of talks about this, how Fourth Wall Phantoms looks at is a reframing of Platonic surrealism. So again, I I think it's really interesting that um, we were sort of on these independent tracks that intersected at like they did at the time that they did. And I'm not necessarily going to credit divine intervention for that, but serendipity at the very least.
So narratology, I like that word. I probably should have heard it before, but it kind of caught me by surprise. But it kind of refers back to a little bit to what your introduction was doing in the beginning of this Fourth Wall Phantoms book. You were talking about the power of narrative, of being the hero in your own story, kind of facing up to archetypal roles, and whether you meet them or you fail to meet them, and what the consequences of that are in your life. So let's go back a little bit and talk about the introduction to your book, what you were trying to convey in that in those pages, and how that sort of fits into your overall arc of personal narrative and where you're going and where you've been as a writer, as a human being, and as a soul or spirit.
Okay, well, that'll occupy the rest of our time together.
I
Um,
know, about 3 days or something, right? I mean,
now,
that was
I think so. To sort of clarify for everyone, I do open the book with a retelling of my experience checking myself into rehab for alcoholism. It's not that's not the core or the basis of the book. It's not really revisited in any meaningful way, so don't be discouraged if that's not your thing. I included it for a couple of different reasons. The first of which was to illustrate that, for me at least, and I suspect for other people, the ideas that are on offer in Fourth Wall Phantoms, which quite frankly are the same, a lot of the same ideas that are on offer in, Jeff's work. They're on offer in Patrick Harper's work. They're on offer in a lot of people's work. But those ideas have real world stakes and they have real
Mhm.
life stakes,
Yes.
for yourself and for the people around you. So that was one of the reasons. Um, the other reason was to sort of show how in my life I have long been a fan of Carl Jung and archetypal interpretations of the phenomenon, but once you sort of look at the phenomenon through those archetypes, you start seeing the world through those archetypes. And if archetypes can be, nouns, um,
Hmm.
they can be sequences of events, I think. And that was a major key. I can't really emphasize this enough. It was a major key in my recovery journey. I'm alive, as I say in the book, because of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. So you want to about Joseph Campbell, we could have that discussion, but Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell saved my life. And what I mean by that is that I'm sitting there, you know, in not a penitentiary, right? But the closest thing to a penitentiary that I hope I will ever be in. I'm being monitored very closely and getting my pills through a window and all those sort of things. Um, and I'm like, where did this go wrong? And you probably had that moment too. It's like,
Oh yeah.
what, can I pinpoint this? Can I backtrack this? Um, and if you can figure out where it went wrong, you can figure out where it went right. But it occurred to me that like, oh, I'm in the belly of the whale. Like that's what this is. Like this is Hans frozen in carbonite and my hand's just been sliced off. That kind of a moment. It is that second act thing. And so like what is supposed to happen next, right? That's the question. Is what is
Yeah.
supposed to happen next? What if we adopt, one of my favorite comparisons that Jung made to archetypes were that they were like dried riverbeds. Um,
Hmm.
and they've been cut over the course of time and that these were the
Energetic
pathways,
channels, right? Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that
absolutely.
as soon as there's something there to fill that channel, that
Hmm.
will probably be the path that it will take. And yeah, it might carve new tributaries over time, but that's the path that it takes. So with that in mind, like, can we apply something like the hero's journey? Can we apply something like, as I do later in the book, props, functions of the Wonder Tale? Can we apply these narrative templates to our lives and find a way to get through the challenges in life? And I just
Hmm.
journaled on that, and I don't know if that's pretentious or not, but I'm here, so I guess it worked to
Yeah.
some degree. So that was reason number two. Um, Reason number three was to showcase um, the fact that it really was a death and rebirth narrative. I don't know any other way to say it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the synchronicities that popped off for me afterward,
I had the same experience, by the way,
you did
where
okay,
an
okay, that's
avalanche of
fascinating.
synchronicities. Yes,
That's
like
fascinating. That is fascinating. I love that. And like someday I'll add it to my list of like 20 other books I want to write is like the supernatural and recovery or something. I think that there is meat on those bones, right?
for sure.
But for me it was like some people are like, they have tea with Bigfoot and a UFO. Like, right. So maybe my synchronicities aren't as impressive for some other people, but for me, for the life that I live, some of the synchronicities that I had were pretty impactful, if you want to use that word. And it occurs to me that that is what it is. It's this death rebirth thing. It's this new life thing. It's this down payment thing. Like I gave up, I got a wife and kids. I love music. I love my career, but I gave up what was arguably the most important thing to me in the world. Um, and
That's what
I
addiction
think,
is, man.
yeah, yeah. And I think that that idea of giving a down payment, something that like, I mean, that's what sacrifice is. It's something, it's not like if you're giving away one of five loaves of bread to the good folk, like that's not really a sacrifice, right? It might be an offering, but it's not really a sacrifice. Like your life is not detrimentally impacted because of that. But when you've got a true sacrifice that does completely rewire yourself, change your way of living, be an inconvenience, be kind of a pain in the neck, then I think that that constitutes something seen as a down payment by whatever this other thing is. And interestingly enough, this didn't make it to the book because it wasn't until afterwards. But my friend Laura, who's in the book, is writing a book on near-death experiences in astrology. And I think it's like the coolest idea because she's found some markers in people's birth charts. People who have near-death experiences or are research near-death experiences have this marker. Super fascinating, opens up a ton of questions. But
Yeah.
she checked, the date that I went to rehab, August 28th, 2020, and she said, "Josh," she said, "I knew that you had the marker in there because you did Ecology of Souls, and she and I had talked about that." But she's like, "That was that was a big day for you in your birth chart with this near-death experience, marker." And she said, "I think you chose the voluntary way to do this as opposed to the involuntary way to do this." So in that sense, I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say that I had a near-death experience because, my life was never in danger, nor did I ever. I mean, I suppose I perceived that it was, shaking on my way to Dahlonega. Um, but it still functioned as a pivot point or as an inflection point in my life for that sort of near-death experience kind of thing. So that's reason what are we up to? Number three so far.
Yeah,
And then the
yeah.
fourth reason, I wanted to share all this, and then but at the same time, I'm like, I've never really included my first person pronoun in a book. Like
Mm.
if you look in Ecology of Souls, it's kind of just in the afterword. It's not really in any of my other stuff. And I'm like, well, I guess, it'd kind of be pretentious to put me in there and then to pull me back out. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to stick with this sort of casual voice. And it was actually incredibly rewarding. The book, I think, if I had to say what it is, obviously it's my voice, but it's kind of like if Keel had the worldview of a Jeff Kripal, right? And but here's the thing, it's also on brand. Like it's so on brand for the book that I'm engaging with you directly because that is sort of a
Good
minor
point. The
fourth
fourth
wall
wall.
break or
Yeah,
metalepsis.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was a suite of reasons why it seemed like it was an appropriate thing. And that's something that I've learned as I've given interviews on this and other books is it's never like one thing that informs these decisions. It's a bunch of things triangulating and sort of dogpiling on me and being like, "Josh, this is the way that this needs to go." And
Yeah.
is that your higher power, or your daimon, or just fate or God? I don't know, but it's something like that, I think.
Yeah. There's so much there I want to dive into. One of the things that I've been noticing a lot as I've kind of watched the world as a situation that it's in politically and everything else, environmentally, that there's all the issues, what they call the meta crisis, right? Part of what I think that is, or is at root in that, is that we've been ostracized from the natural world. We've been alienated from, the universe in a lot of ways. And it seems to me that people who have gone through addiction battles, and not just addiction battles. I mean, you mentioned NDEs and just trauma and those sorts of things. But when those things happen, they come out better wired to the universe, it seems like, or at least to some extent more capable, more profoundly affected by their lives, and therefore richer, wiser. Like I had a hell of a time as an addict. I ended up homeless. I went to jail. I didn't go to penitentiary, thank God, but I went to
Right.
jail, spent several days in jail. I got a DUI, which haunts me to this day. I mean, like bad things happened, but I would not go back because the person I am today is so much richer than the person I was before, and I'm so much more humble, but but about who and what I am.
That's a catch-22. You can't call
It
yourself
is.
humble without being.
I know.
I know. No, I know what you mean. It just, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've noticed this too. Like, I would the big caveat to that is for those who integrate it, right? And like,
Yes, exactly
let's
right.
go ahead and toot our horns, because it seems like we have, the number of people that I know that I saw come in and go back out and come back in,
People
and
that have
just
died. I mean, I
yeah,
know
aren't with
people,
us.
lots of
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Um, but so it's one of those things where it's a high risk, high reward kind of position to be in. And but I will say that like the people that I have known who have gone through this are like my favorite people in the world.
Yeah.
Because they do realize what the stakes are. They have to make it out the other side of this, you have to do a lot of personal work, about your position in the universe and what you what you are and aren't worth, right? Like you are
Yeah.
worth a lot, but you're not the center of everything.
Yeah.
And just there's a real pragmatism and a real no BS kind of attitude that a lot of people who have integrated recovery, I think, handle really well. So yeah, it's like, and that's the thing. It's like you talk to people who have had their like the rock bottom is the simultaneously the worst and best thing to happen to you. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly. Yeah.
it's horrible, but you wouldn't trade it for a dadgum thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, I, as you can probably tell, it's come up several times in this interview. Like I get really awkward when I talk about like what I do and do and don't get wrong about life, right? But I had to learn these lessons one way or the other, and I would like to think that coming up on 5 years, I'm getting closer to the doing it right part than I am the doing it wrong part.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 5 years is a hell of a journey, and I'm coming up on 9. So, I mean, congratulations to
Yeah,
you.
congratulations to you.
Well, thank you. It's interesting. What to me, it seems like if we could somehow skip the need for the trauma and get to a place where we just actively um,
Mhm.
uh, make it part of the culture that we're each expected to sort of undergo some sort of narrative journey as part of our existence. Is
Yeah.
that the underlying message that we're all being given that we have to be a hero of our own circumstance in order to achieve some level of, I don't know, spiritual existential growth? I wonder if you see it that
Yeah.
way and if that ties into your faith journey at all.
No, I mean, I definitely do. And like, if you want to step off the trail here, there's plenty of room, and there's plenty. We're stepping into the big dark forest here. But
I love
yeah, I
it.
mean, it just, it. I think that you're right, and like, I think that there was a time and place when that was one of the functions of religion was to sort of take you to or beyond that. I mean, like, there's an argument to be made that that's what the Eleusinian mysteries were, is to take you
Yeah.
on this, experience. I
Let you
think,
die, right? Almost physically
yeah,
die, or at
yeah.
least act it out. Yeah.
Same thing with a good psychedelic trip, one that you learn from, if you're doing it in that sort of ritual sort of way. But I think that what's happened, and this is, angry old man. I'm 40 now, so I can say angry old man, right? Um, I think we culturally, at least in the modern West, right, have settled for like an okay baseline. And that okay baseline means that we don't really get a lot of deep depths, but we don't get a lot of high heights, right? Everything's just kind of like stable, and it's like we're on this it's like we're on a cultural SSRI, right? Like everything's
Yeah.
kind of just
Yeah. Yeah.
it just is. It's neither here nor there. And I wonder if, again, angry old man rant incoming. Like I love video games too, but like I wonder if there are certain things that we're sort of bred and circusing ourselves into a weaker spiritual stance. And if we
Yeah.
couldn't, like, actually, if we wouldn't enjoy those higher highs by experiencing some of that work and that drudgery and that painful self work and that painful relationship work. I wonder if embarking on that sort of a quest wouldn't pay dividends for us at the individual level, and that's the only way that anything improves at the cultural level, right? Is by a bunch of individuals making their own changes. So I think that you're onto something with that. I really do. Um, but I don't know. It's kind of like my kind of like that moment when I checked myself into rehab. Like apparently I didn't know this, but apparently I chose the easier of the two ways, and I hope that our culture isn't I wish that our culture would choose the easier of the two ways because, with the way that things go, I fear that we're going to be forced into the harder of the two ways, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, the
There,
death experience or whatever, the
yeah.
NDE,
Well,
yeah,
and then there's
true crisis.
no shortage of cataclysms looming on the horizon, right? And I realize that it's always been like that, but I think that now feels especially fraught. You know.
Yeah. It's interesting. A little while ago, and I'm just sort of following my gut here with this conversation, so I hope you don't mind. But I enjoy
No,
talking
it's
to you.
fine.
You mentioned astrology, and you had a friend who charted. That's one of the big surprises that I've had in these past 2 or 3 years is that I've come around on astrology because I've known people who have broken it down to me, and there are some very uncanny things that can come up in an astrological chart, and it says something about the nature of the universe that I don't think it's a causal relationship. Like that's part of what I think is the misinterpretation that a lot of people have that like if there's a stars in the sky or the planets in a particular place, it's causing you to be this kind of person or have this kind of experience. I think that there are correlations. I think that there are resonances, fractal relationships maybe that could be going on. But it says something fundamental about what is at heart in nature and this kind of weird holism and unity, right? And we're all kind of just energetic expressions of these same few archetypal forces, maybe. But you mentioned it, so I wanted to get your thoughts on astrology and how you think about it and what you think it says about the nature of the universe.
I simultaneously wish I did and did not know more about astrology. Because if I did, I would understand some of this stuff a little bit better. I know just enough to be dangerous to myself, right? Um, but I and the flip side of that too is that, every January I listen to like the several podcasts of like the forecast for that year, and I get what I call the astrology flu, which is where I'm
Yeah,
like, I'm sure that war is incoming and it's gonna be, any number of dreary things happening. But what I think really is the main takeaway of astrology, well, I think there are a couple of main takeaways. And again, this is just, I'm not an expert on this, so this is just the way that I've interfaced with it personally. Um, Number one is to never underestimate reality's love of a good rug pull or a good pun or a good bait and switch. It is that thing that you hear about in so many old tales about trying to avert the prophecy and the prophecy ending up happening, or you know,
yeah. You make it happen by
or
virtue of trying to avoid it.
you focus all your attention over here because of one indicator when really it was a symbolic indicator of something entirely differently. And that takes me into point number two, which does tie us into back into fourth wall phantoms a bit. It's that like reality really is symbolic, because you do get, I don't know, let's take something like I don't uh, like Pisces and fish symbolism, and then like you'll see there was something I was listening to some podcaster who was talking about like when the endless shrimp like almost bankrupted Red Lobster. Like there was something in Red Lobster's birth chart that sort of indicated like just things like that. That sort of are kind of oblique and sideways, but they make a sort of internal symbolic logic. That like, or anyway. So I guess what I'm getting at is that symbolism is a lot more potent than we give it credit for, and I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of these phenomena in general, um, especially the UFO, thing, speaks to us in symbols, is because they do have a potential to carry so much weight and to convey information in a way that is integrated into yourself. And honestly, like one of the things that I play with in the book is that um, the space in which the true paranormal events happen is neither in yourself or in the thing that you're having experience with, but it's in that space in between of meaning making.
Mhm.
Because meaning is because symbolism is in and of itself. Northrop Frye, art critic, literary critic, mentioned this. Symbolism is in and of itself sort of a miniature ritual,
Mhm.
and so to take that and run with it at the level of one's life and lived experience, I think is something that we neglect at our own peril. Like I'm doing, and we all do it to a degree. Like that's what your gut is, that's what your instinct is. Oh, this feels right. Wouldn't it be poetic if this, that, or the other? Um, so yeah, I think that those have been my main takeaways from astrology. And then like I have to listen to I can only listen to so many forecasts before I have to tune it out. And I'm like, nope, just go ahead and do what you're gonna do, be okay. Because I have been told that looking back in retrospect at some things in my life that um I appear to have a very good intuition about when to embark on major life events and stuff like that. So here's hoping
Yeah.
that trend continues.
For myself, I had two moments where I was really confronted with the accuracy of astrology, and both were. I have a friend, David Stess, who's co-hosted the show with me before, and he had an encounter with an older gentleman, an Indian man who was actually knew J. Krishnamurti and was sort of involved in that movement back in the day. But he's a very powerfully spiritual person and uses astrology as sort of the leaping off point for these insanely precognitive and intuitional readings of people. And David had one, and it just rocked him to his core. So that got me to explore, and then I got some just some basic stuff off the internet. And I'd always been told that it was a matter of, vague predictions that anyone can kind of read into themselves. And so it's all just people trying to have, wishful thinking or whatnot. But my wife and I both had personality readings that we found online. And what they described for each of us is uncanny in its accuracy and goes to really deep fundamental processes in our personality that aren't easy to diagnose unless you know someone intimately, you know?
Yeah.
And we're both like, that's me, and I don't know how this thing knew that, you know?
Well, and that's sort of been my takeaway is that like the the broader strokes of it in terms of like what your birth chart says about your personality and about again those yearly forecasts, like those things I think are pretty accurate. When it gets more granular, and maybe I'm
Mhm.
just reading the wrong ones, like right, I'm not sure how accurate Cosmos
Yeah, yeah,
astrology person is. But
yeah, yeah.
but like when you get to like that sort of day-to-day granularity, that's when I'm like, oh, this doesn't really seem to land as much. But it's in those broad strokes where I'm like, oh no, this has a high degree of accuracy.
Yeah.
Um, and again, whether or not you sort of view it as um, hindsight being 2020 and being able to sort of graft your own biases and interpretations on it, all depends on how much importance you place on things like symbolism.
Well, like you were talking before, I mean, archetypes are dry riverbeds. I view all of it as sort of the reading the energies of archetypes. I mean, it's kind of archetypal astrology, and so things are going to manifest differently for different people, have different details.
Right.
But the broad strokes, the riverbeds, the channels are going to kind of be inclusive for more and more people. And um, anyway, I don't know why we got off on this tangent, but it's one of those
No, it's
things that I
fun. I never get to talk about it, and part of the reason I never get to talk about it is because I don't know as much as I should, despite listening to it. But yeah, I do find it fascinating, and I find that there's a lot more utility in it. And I've turned a couple people on to just being casually interested, like I am, and they too have said, "Oh, this actually seems pretty accurate." I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind of a thing."
There's a book, Richard Tarnas, Cosmos and Psyche, which if you it's a really great book. I've interviewed him a couple times, but he does a great job of sort of making the argument as to why it seems like it works, and then also different people throughout history and how their charts manifested different planetary movements.
Yeah.
And he's a brilliant scholar, formerly from Esalen, or maybe even still.
Yeah, I'm familiar with his work. I have not read his book. But yeah, sometimes I wonder, like if if everything that we talk about or everything that I talk about isn't sort of downstream of astrology. It certainly seems downstream of archetypes, and
Exactly, exactly.
And
That's the key to everything. I kind of almost feel like in some way, you
I've
know.
had this idea for a project that I wish I'm just going to say it because I'm never going to get around to it, right? So if anybody who's an astrologer who is also
Mhm.
interested in UFOs wants a free book idea, it's to take the contactees and the planets that they claim to visit and
Uh-huh.
compare them against their own birth charts
Ah,
and the
interesting.
symbolism therein, and see if there's anything to learn there. I'm sure there's going to be something interesting, but that'll be kind of fun.
I did this one interview with a guy that I met randomly on Reddit, right? Not usually a place where I'm looking for
Right.
interviews, but this guy was fantastic, and he has developed what he calls the astromythic map that he uses AI with, which AI is actually a pretty powerful tool with astrology because it has the memory to pull it up. Anyway, he claims that people who have, like you were saying with your, well, not really. Basically, if people have certain elements in their chart, they're likely to be experiencers or people who have profound
Mm,
religious or transformative spiritual experiences. And people who tend to be skeptics always have a prominent Saturn placement. And he goes through and analyzes the chart of all these famous people and experiencers and can point to precisely how that's reflected in their chart. And the same for prominent skeptics.
that is
So
fascinating.
it's an interesting argument, and it seems like it bears out. I don't know enough about, the methodology for what he's doing, but it's an interview in my. I'll put a link to it in the description for folks if they want
Yeah,
to check it
that
out. But it's
sounds
definitely
super
worthwhile.
fascinating. Yeah.
The astromythic map. So, I mean, to get back to your book, what do you think are the most important takeaways that people can get from this project? And yeah, let's go there.
Yeah, so I think that the idea that I still has really completely reshaped the way that I view the paranormal is this idea of the fourth wall break, and to get a little bit more granular on that, we do have to go into narratology a little bit.
Yeah,
So
because
for anybody who doesn't know, um, breaking the fourth wall is an old theater term. It means that, there's this invisible wall between the actors slash characters and the audience, and whenever someone on stage acknowledges the audience, that's a fourth wall break, and we see this all the time in media nowadays. But sometimes we call that being meta, being meta. And the reason people call it being meta is because the actual narratological term for this is metalepsis, and there are books and books and books of essays and even debate on this concept of metalepsis. But metalepsis is anytime those hierarchies of reality are broken in art. So they are the character looking at the audience, and it's the Deadpool shtick, right?
yeah.
Or the Arrested Development shtick, or something like that. So this idea of breaking the fourth wall can be top down. The narrator can acknowledge the characters, or the characters can acknowledge the narrator, or characters to audience, or even, if you want to talk about crossovers and spin-offs and stuff, they kind of have that flavor as well. But the idea of metalepsis, um, I think it's very similar to what John Keel called the reflective factor, which is this old adage that when you look at the paranormal looks back at you. Um, Granted, my mileage has varied on that, but I have talked to plenty of people who have had that happen. The more they're interested in the stuff, the more activity ramps up. The less when they make it a point to ignore it or to shut it off, they tend to shut it off. And that to me is very similar to this idea of looking past that fourth wall at the audience if you're a character. And similarly enough, interestingly enough, you could take any of these essays that I read on metalepsis and swap out paranormal or supernatural, and it would read exactly the same. Metalepsis tends to destabilize the character's sensation of reality. It is simultaneously humorous or horrifying. It allows them to accomplish things that they would not have otherwise accomplished if they didn't realize that they were in a piece of art. And really, what that speaks to is this realization of our reality existing in hierarchies, much as there are hierarchies within, a book.
Mhm.
Um, where between the character and the narrator and the reader and all these interacting in tandem. And so just sort of building off of that and exploring that, I found a number of resonances which I thought were really important and really quite poetic. Obviously, the sort of patron saint of metalepsis is the trickster, because the trickster is transgressing boundaries all the time and flipping things upside down. And I mean that's what Deadpool is, right? Deadpool is a
Yeah.
trickster, and he's breaking the fourth wall all the time. And anybody who has much experience in the paranormal knows that the trickster has been invoked numerous times in regards to the way that these phenomena behave and the sort of archetype that tends to steer the way that these things, the way that these stories and interactions seem to go. I mean, again, I'll say it. I've said it plenty of times before, but I'll say it plenty of times yet. George P. Hansen's The Trickster and the Paranormal is like the
I was
book.
going to say that. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's the book that like if you're like, I wonder how this bit of UFO news is going to go. Consult George Hansen's The Trickster and the Paranormal, and you're probably going to be able to predict exactly what's going to happen. The group's going to fall apart. There's going to be infighting. There's going to be some bit of self-negating evidence. Anyway, so yeah, the trickster goes hand in hand with metalepsis with these fourth wall breaks. But the moment that I really realized
Okay,
that,
but stop real quick.
oh yeah,
Doesn't that say something about the nature of what we're dealing with? I mean, the fourth
yeah,
wall is like breaking through a level of reality and talking to someone who's outside the authority structure of the dramatic moment, right?
hmm
Well, is that what's happening in these moments? It's like that is so ding.
well,
Anyway,
and what we think about it, once characters realize that they're in a narrative, they're able to sort of game the narrative, which starts to look a lot like synchronicities. Like, these
yeah,
plot, some synchronicities that people have, if you put them into a script or a book, like no one would believe it. Like
yeah,
they're that tidy, right? So it does look like you Deus Machina kind of things.
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I think that it speaks to so much of that. So the things that really there are two things that really cemented my conviction that this was a powerful metaphor. The first of which is if you think about, ancient Greek vases, right? And you think about the characters on those, they're almost always in profile, right? But I did find a bit of metalepsis scholarship that pointed out, hey, yeah, they're all in profile except for the dead, dreamers, deities, people in altered states of consciousness, and monsters. And those characters on Greek vases, are more often depicted facing the viewer of the
Mhm.
vase. They
Interesting.
are breaking that fourth wall. The dead, sleepers, deities, monsters, and people in altered states of consciousness. That's the
Yeah,
list of people and things that interface with the paranormal, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so that's like that seems to me as if that has some bearing on, art imitating life. Granted, that is a sort of a very Western history perspective. I have a lot of indigenous perspectives towards the end of the book that I think speak to this in an even more poignant way.
yeah,
Which since they're at the end of the book, I won't spoil them, but I think they find them really compelling.
yeah.
So that's one bit that really made me go, aha. And the other bit also comes from classical literature. There was a scholar, forgive me, I can't remember her name. I don't have the PDF pulled up right now. But she pointed out that in a lot of Greek tragedies, um, there are inflection points in the narrative where a significantly traumatic moment will prompt the narrator into a moment of metalepsis. They will stop, they will acknowledge the reader, something along those lines. They will comment, they will sort of step out of their character of just being an objective observer and comment on it. Trauma triggers metalepsis, which sounds an awful lot to me like trauma, triggering the paranormal. And like we've all known that this is the case because I don't know how many objections happen in The Princess Bride that that sort of bring the narrative to a stop. Or, honestly, like I've woken myself up um from dreams at a particularly traumatic moment, right? Like, I'm sobbing, I'm so sad that I wake up with tears on my face, or I'm terrified and I wake myself up. Like trauma does have a chance to trip the circuit breaker into a new reality. So that seemed to me like it was especially fitting, and that there was some insight to be learned from that there. Now, the question really, though, is like, why does reality function like a narrative? And
Exactly.
I've read some criticisms of my book that are like, well, no, it's that narratives resemble reality because that's the way we've structured our narratives, but it still doesn't answer the question of why this is functioning that way. Like, why
Yeah.
why does why can we layer so many, in some cases, postmodern trends onto our lives and gain some insight for the trajectory that our lives take. I'm not sure. I spent another portion of the book taking a look at one of the founding figures of narratology, Vladimir Prop, who walks through the individual 31, I believe, beats of fairy tales. And again, yes, stories are structured like life, but the specificity with which those line up with something like your traditional alien abduction is pretty jarring. And,
Yeah.
there are plenty of other things in my life that don't fit that theme. Like they don't fit that narrative. Going to the grocery store doesn't.
Yeah. 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 Exactly right.
So I think that that says something about this dance between art and life. And what it really is it kind of comes into this sort of one of the people I lean on throughout the book because it's central to the question is Eric Wargo and his work on retrocausality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
question at the heart of Fourth Wall Phantoms is, well, is it predictive or is it a manifestation, right? I think that there are time loops. Eric's done his homework, and I respect his work incredibly. I think there are time loops, and I also think that there are culture loops. Like there are these loops where the phenomenon eats our culture, and our culture eats the phenomenon, and you do wind up with UFOs stopping car engines, and that was prefigured in something else, and then that was prefigured in something else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're in this it's either a singularity of everywhere, every when, in sort of a block universe sense, or it is this whirlwind where we're constantly borrowing. The phenomenon is constantly borrowing from us, and we're constantly borrowing from the phenomenon. And indeed, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, maybe the same thing.
Yeah. Eric Wargo's most recent book on the UFOs, I forget the name of
I've
it off
not
the top
read
of my
that one.
head.
I've not read that with
It's really, really
the
good. And he
great
talks
David
about,
Metcalf cover. Yeah.
yeah, and he talks about future humans and, how that might play into what we're seeing with the UFOs, kind of a departure off of, what's his name? The
Mike
Montana,
Masters.
yeah, Mike Masters
Yeah.
stuff, but a little bit different, but really, really, really well done.
Yeah.
Another interview I've
Well,
had
and
recently.
so I had a sit down with Eric before I wrote Fourth Wall Phantoms because I'm like, a lot of this is going to seem oppositional. Like, I disagree with some of your stuff, but like so I got some, he clarified some questions that I had, and I still do depart ways with him on a few things, but those his books, Time Loops and From Nowhere, are just so well done that I think he's absolutely correct about some aspects of this.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. You mentioned sort of the Mike Masters stuff. I had the chance to meet Dr. Masters in New York back in 2023, and at first I was a bit apprehensive because the ecology of souls was sort of my thing, and that seems oppositional to his ideas of future humans.
Future
But I'm like,
humans, yeah.
but no, it's not really. It's just a matter of where we are on the timeline. Like that's all it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
It's
exactly
still
right.
it's either the ancestors reaching forward or our descendants reaching backward. And again, if we really are engaged in this sort of simultaneity, which Wargo's work would suggest, and I think I'm growing ever more sympathetic to that. Then like this idea of when they come from, the past or the future, doesn't really have that much bearing.
Yeah,
Um,
they just figured out how to move laterally rather than,
right,
you know.
right. And and so to that extent, like I people probably see some of the different routes that I take as being contradictory. Like, oh, he said it was all dead people, and now he says it's all the imagination. But like, I'm not sure that there's much of a distinction between the imagination, the imaginal realm, as Henri Corbin would have called it, and the spirit world, right? I'm not
Yeah.
sure that that's not the case, and I'm not sure that we don't sort of effervesce into the imagination. I mean, I know that everyone that I've loved who's passed on is very much still in my head,
Yeah.
and I
Well,
think
no,
that
it's like the
yeah.
traditional ideas of the astral realm. I mean, that's just sort of like the manifestation of people's imagination and fears, and then you go beyond that to different levels, but they're all sort of nested in top of each other if those
I mean,
traditions can be
y-
believed.
yeah, I wish that the movie hadn't used this title because now it sounds like it's a reference every time, but it really is everything everywhere all at once,
All at
right?
once. Yeah,
It
yeah,
really
totally.
is. Yeah, I think there's something to that.
But I was going to ask you about that. Like your books take on a lot of different topics and come from a lot of different directions. My research that I do for the show is always sort of inherently personal, right? Like I'm trying to seek what I think is the real thing and trying to figure out how to hone in on it. I love having fantastic conversations with really good people. That's my passion across my life. But this is all part of me trying to find some semblance of what might be true, right? I don't want to have conversations just to have them. I want to try and get somewhere with them. Your books are a fantastic fuel for that. I wonder where you're at in your journey of trying to find. I mean, is this part of your search for what you think might be true, or not? I mean, what's your? How do you read that?
I'm gonna share something, a revelation that I had with Kevin Cann yesterday. And we were talking about some ideas that he's had recently, and it occurred to me that we can get as high resolution as we want to with our interpretations of these phenomena, but I'm not sure that they come to us unless we adopt a low resolution perspective. And what I mean by that is that I'm convinced that if I continue to go into the woods looking for Bigfoot, and in the back of my head, I'm looking for aspects of the wild man archetype and how speaks to some parapsychological case from the late 1850s or something. If I do that, I don't think I'm going to see Bigfoot. If I look at the UFO and if I look in the sky for a UFO and I'm thinking about how it's going to resemble a psychopomp's boat and, it's going to all those implications, I don't think I'm going to see a UFO. I think I have to be looking for an alien ship and a big monkey and a dead person in a haunted house. Um, it doesn't necessarily mean I think that's what's going on because
Yeah.
I have, as you said, like 8+ books. I don't even know how to count them. Um, but um, but I think that it is that sort of meek shall inherit the earth, come to me as little children kind of attitude. Like of course, that might be why children have so many more experiences with these sort of things, is because they're not as laden with all the BS and fart sniffing as I am, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that might be a shortcoming of mine in the field, as I've made it a point to be in the field more. Um, that's one component to the question. The other component, that's sort of like, what does Josh think is going on? I really don't know. I mean, I, it's kind of funny. People have looked at like where the footprints in, and they're like, oh, he thinks that it's Bigfoot's this or that or the other. Like, part of me wants it to be a big monkey because that can be proven someday, and it would,
Yeah.
good heavens, it would take so much more. I wouldn't have to argue about all this other stuff, and I could embrace, piloerection and mid-tarsal breaks and dermal ridges and all these things that are really compelling. Like, it'd be, yes, it is compelling because it's exactly what it is. Um, I want fairies to be sort of nature elementals because that's outside of us. But I'm also following this stuff like being like, well, that's what you want, Josh. But like, what are these other things that people aren't talking about? So where I am nowadays is probably this synthesis, predictably enough, of ecology of souls thesis and the fourth wall phantoms thesis, which I sort of touched on a little bit, is that spirit and the world of imagination are one and the same, are interchangeable functionally. That is what's being tapped into with occultism. It is a realm of it is a realm where language fails, as we hear from so many experiencers of near-death experiences and UFO abductions and such. Um, that's also the creative realm. That's also the artistic realm because that's what art does, right? That's
Yeah,
art
yeah.
conveys stuff that words can't. Even a book. I know a book is full of words. Yeah, I get it. But like the stuff in between the words is where real literary art comes together,
Yeah.
right?
It's the impact on the reader that it's the
Yeah, yeah,
artistic. I mean,
yeah. So I think that's what we're tapping into, and that's why um I think the best art is divine. And look, I'm a musician and I've written a novel. I don't think I make that best art that I'm referring to. I'm talking about that like really endurable, lasting stuff.
yeah.
I think that it really is literally something supernatural, and I think that's tapping into that place where our souls came from and to whence they return. So that's kind of where I'm at. Um, Having said that, Fourth Wall Phantoms took me to some really strange places, and the ground beneath my feet started to dissolve, and I'm like, I cannot stay here. Like, you can't remain in a realm of, I don't care if this really happened this way or not. This is a cool story, which is sort of where you wind up by the end of the book. that's not a healthy place to stay as someone who's interested in these topics, right?
Yeah, because you can end up a lunatic in a hurry.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean, yeah.
mean,
Well, that's the Chapel Perilous thing, right?
yeah, yeah, totally,
Yeah, yeah,
totally.
yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of it's probably too introspective and too much in the weeds, but
No, I love
sort
it,
of
man.
a mixture of these things, and I think that Ecology of Souls and Fourth Wall Phantoms play together in a certain sense if you turn your head and squint and you sort of fold in these two spaces into one. But at the end of the day, also, I'm just convinced that we don't have the language for any of this. You know,
Yeah.
it's like that. There's that one of my favorite one of my favorite memes is like is I think it's the person who's like nailing into the surf. And it says philosopher, and the nail says language, and the surf that's coming in says reality. It's like we can't. And like that's the way paranormalists are, right? Like, we've got all these different nails in the sand that say, oh, shamanism and near-death experience and out-of-body experiences and the fae folk and UFOs, and the paranormal's washing in like this tide, and it's all broken from the start. It just is in that sense, I think.
Last question I got for you. You make no secret of the fact that you're a spiritual person, that you are a man of faith. How do you merge the two passions, pursuits, interests? How does one inform the other? Do you ever find them in conflict? And if so, how do you mitigate that?
How do I merge them together? Very carefully and with a healthy dose of cognitive dissonance, right? I mean, so yeah, I am still a practicing Christian. The Bible, though, is the most supernatural book ever written. Um,
For sure.
and as my as my friend and colleague Jack Hunter says, religion is the domesticated paranormal, and I really do believe that. Um, so to me, the question is a bit like, how can how can you be afraid of coyotes in the wild or wolves in the wild and still own a dog? Like, how can you have that thing in your house, And it's like they are kind of substantively different things. They're both related, and I'm sure that the domesticative lessons that we've learned as a species could be applied again to modern wolves, and you would end up breeding another dog.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of it. But a little bit of it is just being really sort of charitable with myself. What we know about the afterlife from the Christian Bible is pretty thin. Most of what we think we know is Christian fanfic, so that sort of answers a lot of the questions that I raised in Ecology of Souls. I literally gave myself like an upset stomach trying to write the religion chapter in Fourth Wall Phantoms, because I do acknowledge I acknowledge that. Okay, so here we go. Here we go. This is it. This is the best. This is the best way to put it. There is a Noah's Ark experience in Kentucky. Um, and I, for whatever reason, found myself there. And there's an entire room at the Noah's Ark experience dedicated to taking down children's storybooks of the Noah narrative. Yeah. Um, and they end up saying, like, playful storybook versions of the Ark diminish God's word, and they turn it into a fairy tale. And that's when I had this light bulb moment, which was like, that's not the problem. The problem is how we treat fairy tales. It's how our
Yeah.
culture treats fairy tales. It's how our
Yeah.
culture treats myth and legend and fairy tales, and automatically says, "Oh, this wasn't literally true as it happened. This isn't a historical document, so it has no worth." No, I think it has more worth than you could ever imagine. And
Yeah.
so, like, at that same exhibit, there are all these sort of apologetics and jumping through hoops to explain how Noah really could have collected all these animals. And it occurred to me then, like, you're trying to force your spiritual religion, your spiritual expression, the spiritual part of yourself into this materialist framework. Why are you appeasing it like that?
Yeah.
Why can't you just read those passages in the Bible and be like, okay, it happened. Don't know how. Don't have to say how. Because a faith that I think is shaken by the impossible was never a faith to begin with.
Yeah.
So all of that being said, God, Satan, heaven, hell, a lot of other things floating around out there. A lot of free agents, I think, of various stripes that are neither good nor bad and can be persuaded to be good and persuaded to be bad, or just simply have desires that don't align with yours, an ecology of souls, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
And sort of just treating it, acknowledging the fact that you can be a Christian and say, okay, yes, but there are Apollonic forces in the world. There are Hermetic forces in the world. There are Odinic forces in the world. There are Osiren forces in the world. Motifs and themes and egregores and undercurrents, like all these things can exist, I think, still within this Christian framework. It's just a matter of what I take with me in my final moments, I think. I think that's the way it works. I don't know. I might be this heretic as I am through my life and slip the mortal coil and, God's like, ah, you were so close. Bye.
Oops.
But that's that's not the charitable version of the creator that I hope is there.
Yeah. I love it, man. It's a fantastic conversation. I deeply
Thanks
appreciate
so
you. I
much.
deeply how thoughtful you are about all of this, including your own faith and how it all fits together. Hopefully we can have another conversation someday soon. Maybe I can get you and Kevin on together.
I would love to. That'll be fun.
I think that would be fun.